She shuffled down the crowded sidewalk, her thin coat barely shielding her from the biting winter wind. Her shoes had holes in them, and her hair, once neatly tied back, now fell in tangled strands around her face. People hurried past her, avoiding eye contact, some muttering under their breath as she passed. To anyone observing, she was just another face in the city's forgotten crowd, a girl with nothing, invisible to the bustling world around her. Her stomach growled, and she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to keep warm. The thought of spending another night on the hard concrete of the shelterless streets made her shiver. She had come a long way that morning, dragging her weary body across neighborhoods she had never dared to venture into before. Somehow, she had ended up outside a bank. The tall glass doors reflected the sun, and through them, she could see the polished marble floors and well-dressed people walking purposefully to their destinations. A part of her felt an almost childish curiosity. She didn't belong here, but there was something magnetic about the space, about the power and wealth contained within. She hesitated, unsure if she should enter. Her life had taught her that stepping into places where you clearly didn't belong usually ended in humiliation or outright rejection. But something inside nudged her forward. She pulled herself up, squared her shoulders, and walked through the doors. The warmth hit her immediately, and she closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the sudden comfort. She opened them to find a small crowd of customers and bank employees staring at her. At first, the reactions were subtle, eyebrows raised, whispers exchanged. A woman behind the counter nudged her coworker, who laughed quietly. The security guard looked her up and down with a mixture of annoyance and disdain. She could feel the weight of their judgment, but she tried to ignore it, focusing on a single goal she had carried with her through months of hardship. She approached the nearest teller, a young man with a neatly trimmed beard and a crisp uniform. His smile faltered as he took in the sight of her ragged appearance. "Can I help you?" he asked, trying to mask the skepticism in his voice. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. I'd like to make a deposit." The teller blinked. "A deposit?" She nodded, reaching into her coat. Her hands trembled slightly as she produced an envelope, worn and yellowed at the edges. The teller took it hesitantly, glancing inside. The murmurs around them grew louder. People began whispering to each other, exchanging amused glances. "Look at that," one woman said quietly. "Who even carries cash like that these days?" Another man chuckled. The girl didn't flinch. She looked the teller directly in the eye. "It's all here," she said simply. "Everything I have." The teller opened the envelope. Inside were stacks of crisp $100 bills, meticulously organized. His eyes widened, then darted nervously around the bank. I need to confirm this," he stammered. He picked up the phone and dialed his manager. Within moments, the manager arrived, a stern woman in a sharp suit, her eyes narrowing as she took in the girl standing there. The whispers escalated into outright laughter. "This is a joke, right?" one customer said under his breath. "She looks like she hasn't eaten in days, and she's carrying all that money." The girl stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. When the manager finally spoke, it was with a mixture of authority and disbelief. "Young lady, can you tell me where this money came from?" The girl took a deep breath. "I inherited it," she said simply. "From someone very important. Someone who wanted me to have it when the time was right." The manager raised an eyebrow. "And you have documents to prove this?" "Yes," the girl said. From a second pocket, she pulled out a thin folder, worn but clearly containing official papers. She handed it over. The manager quickly leafed through the documents, her brow furrowing as she read. The whispers in the room faded slightly, replaced by stunned silence. Where did you say your name was?" the manager asked. She gave her full name. The manager's eyes went wide as she placed the papers on the counter and turned to the teller. "Call security, and the branch director, now." The teller froze, and the security guard glanced at the manager, unsure what to do. The other customers were still staring, some trying to process what they had just witnessed. The girl stood quietly, her face calm, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't need to explain herself. The documents spoke for her. Moments later, the branch director, a tall man with graying hair, arrived, accompanied by a couple of bank officers. He read through the documents, occasionally murmuring to his assistants. Finally, He looked at the girl, his expression a mixture of respect and disbelief. "This is authentic," he said. "You are the sole heir to a trust worth." He paused, swallowing hundreds of millions of dollars. The room went silent. The people who had laughed moments before now avoided her gaze, shame and awe washing over their faces. The security guard straightened, and even the teller seemed at a loss for words. "Excuse me," one customer whispered. "Did she just say millions?" The girl nodded. "Yes, I am the beneficiary of a trust. I can now access it fully, thanks to the arrangements made by my late guardian." The bank employees began murmuring among themselves. Phones were taken out. People started making calls, trying to verify the information. Reporters from nearby media outlets, who had been filming a story in the area, suddenly appeared, capturing the scene on their cameras. The girl didn't seem to notice the attention. She simply handed over additional identification and answered the director's questions politely, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. One of the customers, a young man who had been snickering just minutes earlier, stepped forward hesitantly. I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I didn't mean." The girl smiled faintly, her eyes calm but piercing. "It's all right," she said. "You can't judge what you don't understand." News of her identity spread quickly. By the end of the day, the story had gone viral. Headlines read things like, "Homeless girl becomes millionaire overnight, from street to trust fund. The girl who surprised a bank, rags to riches in the blink of an eye." People across the city were talking about her, sharing her story on social media, amazed at the twist of fate that had brought this unassuming girl into unimaginable wealth. Despite the sudden attention, she remained humble. She knew the money was important, but she also knew it was only a tool, not a solution to all her problems. She had experienced the world's cruelty firsthand, and she had no intention of letting that change her. Her first act, after securing her trust, was to help those who were still struggling on the streets. She donated to shelters, food banks, and organizations dedicated to helping the homeless. She wanted to create a bridge for others who, like her, had been invisible for far too long. The girl also invested in her education, enrolling in courses she had once only dreamed of taking. She learned about finance, business, and philanthropy, determined to use her newfound resources wisely. The same people who had laughed at her were now inspired by her intelligence, grace, and vision. She attended meetings with top executives, negotiated contracts, and started initiatives that brought positive change to the community. Over time, she became a symbol of hope. People who had once ignored the homeless began to see them differently. Her story challenged stereotypes, showing that a person's current situation does not define their potential. She appeared on talk shows, sharing her journey and encouraging others to invest in people, not just possessions. Despite all the attention, she never forgot the cold streets where she had spent so many nights. She returned to the neighborhood she had once called home, walking among the familiar faces. Children ran to greet her, and adults nodded respectfully. They remembered her not as a millionaire, but as the brave girl who had walked through the doors of that bank with dignity, refusing to be defined by their laughter. In interviews, when asked what it felt like to go from being homeless to wealthy, she would simply smile. "It wasn't the money that changed me," she said. "It was the belief that someone could see beyond my appearance, that I could be more than what the world thought I was. That's what made all the difference." Her life continued to flourish. She started her own foundation to help young people in vulnerable situations. She funded scholarships, mentorship programs, and job training initiatives. Every project she undertook was infused with the empathy and understanding she had cultivated through her own struggles. She had become a quiet force for change, a reminder that kindness, intelligence, and resilience could coexist with success. Years later, the memory of that day at the bank remained vivid. She often thought about the laughter, the disbelief, and the eventual recognition. It reminded her of the power of perception, and how easily people can misjudge others based on appearances alone. She had walked into that bank expecting skepticism, and she had left not only with wealth but with the ability to rewrite the story for countless others. Her journey was far from ordinary, but she embraced every twist and turn with grace. The girl who had once been invisible was now a beacon of hope, proving that courage, determination, and integrity could change lives, not just hers, but the lives of everyone willing to believe in the unexpected. And through it all, she never forgot the lessons she had learned on the streets. Humility, perseverance, and the understanding that true value lies not in wealth, but in character and compassion. By the time she had transformed her life completely, she had become more than just a story. She was an example, a lesson, and a source of inspiration for anyone who had ever been overlooked or underestimated. People didn't just talk about the homeless girl who walked into a bank. They marveled at the woman she had become, and the world, in its way, had to acknowledge the truth. Never underestimate anyone, because you never know who they really are.